The silence that fell over the grand foyer of the Waldorf Astoria was so profound you could hear the soft, frantic clicks of the paparazzi's camera shutters echoing against the gold-leafed ceiling. For months, the tabloids had painted her as the tragic, discarded artifact of a billionaire's midlife crisis. They had all gathered to watch Chloe Davenport, the flashy, 24-year-old mistress, claim her stolen throne. But as the heavy brass doors opened and the true Mrs. Sterling stepped into the chandelier's blinding light, the air was sucked out of the room. Chloe's smug smile shattered, and in that single devastating moment, high society realized a terrifying truth. You do not go to war with a woman who has nothing left to lose but her mercy. The Hastings-Sterling marriage died on a Tuesday morning, not with a screaming match or a shattered vase, but with the quiet, sickening chime of a misplaced iPad. Serena Sterling sat at the head of the 20-foot mahogany dining table in their sprawling Central Park West penthouse. She was a woman who wore her 38 years with a quiet, expensive grace. Her lineage, the Hastings family, traced its roots back to the foundational bedrock of New York real estate. When she married Richard Sterling 12 years ago, she brought the social pedigree. He, the ruthless ambition of a Silicon Valley tech prodigy eager to conquer the East Coast. Together, they were formidable. Now they were strangers sharing an area code. Richard was pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, barking into his phone about the upcoming IPO of his latest venture, Sentinel Data. He was handsome in that sharp, aggressive way that wealth affords a man in his 40s, custom Brioni suits, artificially brightened teeth, and a profound, exhausting arrogance. He didn't notice when his secondary tablet, carelessly left on the marble kitchen island, illuminated. Serena, rising to pour herself another cup of black coffee, glanced down. Chloe D. The new silk sheets for the Soho loft arrived. You're going to love them against your skin, Daddy. See you at 8. Wear the cologne I like. Serena stopped breathing. The words blurred, then sharpened, etching themselves into her retinas. She had known, of course. A wife always knows. She had smelled the faint, saccharine scent of Baccarat rouge on his lapels. She had noticed the sudden, unexplained, emergency board meetings that kept him away on weekends. She had seen the subtle, dismissive way he had begun to speak to her in public, treating her less like a partner and more like a decaying monument he was legally obligated to maintain. But seeing it in stark, black and white text was a violent physical blow. Richard ended his call and walked into the kitchen, entirely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath his marriage. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. I'm flying out to San Francisco tonight. Sentinel is hitting some regulatory snags. I'll be gone through the weekend. Serena slowly placed her coffee cup on the saucer. The porcelain clinked with a tiny, sharp sound. Through the weekend. Richard, the Crescent Moon charity ball is this Saturday. We are the co-chairs. Richard sighed, a harsh sound of deep, theatrical inconvenience. Serena, I don't have time for the museum crowd right now. I'm dealing with a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Go, smile for the cameras, write the check. Tell them I'm securing the future of the global tech infrastructure. It's the most important philanthropic event of the season, Serena said, her voice terrifyingly steady, though her hands were trembling so violently she had to press them flat against the cold marble. And my family founded the trust. Then you handle it, he snapped, grabbing his briefcase. He paused, looking her up and down. Serena was wearing a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, elegant but understated. Richard's lip curled slightly. And Serena, try to liven up a bit. You've been looking so severe lately. Buy a new dress. Put some color on. I've got to run." He didn't kiss her goodbye. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind him. Serena stood in the dead silence of the $30 million penthouse. The realization settled over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He wasn't going to San Francisco. He was going to the Soho loft. He was leaving her to face the apex of New York society alone, knowing full well the rumors that were already bleeding into the gossip columns. She picked up the iPad. She didn't cry. The Hastings women were not criers. They were strategists. Serena unlocked the device. She had known his passcode since 2014, his mother's maiden name and birth year, and began to scroll. What she found over the next 3 hours was not just an affair. It was an absolute, systemic humiliation. Chloe Davenport was 24, a former catalog model turned lifestyle influencer. She was loud, gaudy, and unapologetically ruthless. Richard wasn't just sleeping with her. He was funding a rival life. There were receipts for a $5 million loft in Soho, a leased Aston Martin, and hundreds of thousands of dollars in Cartier jewelry. But the final dagger, the one that pierced straight through Serena's ribs and fundamentally altered her soul, was an invoice from Sotheby's. Richard had purchased the Tears of the Ocean, a breathtaking, absurdly rare diamond and sapphire collar necklace. It had sold for $8 million. Serena stared at the receipt, a cold, bitter laugh tearing its way out of her throat. The Tears of the Ocean wasn't just any necklace. It had belonged to Serena's late grandmother, sold off in the 1990s when the Hastings family faced a temporary but severe liquidity crisis. When Richard's tech company had its first massive breakout, he had sworn to Serena, holding her face in his hands, that he would track down the necklace and buy it back for her 10th wedding anniversary. Their 10th anniversary had passed 2 years ago. He had given her a tennis bracelet and blamed the market. Now he had bought her grandmother's legacy to drape over the collarbones of a 24-year-old Instagram model. Serena locked the iPad and placed it exactly where Richard had left it. The woman who had woken up that morning, the dutiful, quiet, supportive billionaire's wife, was dead. In her place, something infinitely colder and sharper took its first breath. By noon, Serena was sitting in the private, mahogany-paneled back room of the Century Club, nursing a gin martini. Across from her sat Beatrice Kensington. Beatrice was a terrifyingly well-connected socialite, with a tongue like a scalpel, and a heart fiercely loyal to those she considered true peers. Serena slid a thick manila folder across the polished table. Beatrice opened it, her perfectly arched eyebrows climbing higher and higher as she scanned the printed screenshots and financial summaries. "Good God, Serena," Beatrice breathed, taking a long sip of her champagne. "I heard the whispers. My trainer mentioned seeing them at Nobu, but I didn't think Richard was this monumentally stupid. An Aston Martin. He's acting like a Russian oligarch in a midlife crisis." "Look at the last page, B," Serena said, her voice a hollow, dry rasp. Beatrice flipped to the back. Her eyes widened, and she genuinely gasped. "The sapphire collar. Serena, this is your grandmother's. Tell me he didn't." "He did, and he gave it to her." Beatrice closed the folder, her expression shifting from shock to a cold, predatory rage. "What do you want to do? I can have her blacklisted from every restaurant, club, and charity board in the tri-state area by 4 p.m. I can make it so this girl can't buy a bagel in Manhattan without being spat on." "No," Serena said sharply. "That's petty. That makes me look like the bitter, discarded wife fighting over scraps. I don't want to fight her in the shadows, B. I want to obliterate them both in the light." Beatrice leaned forward, an excited gleam in her eye. "I'm listening." "Richard told me he's skipping the Crescent Moon ball for business," Serena explained. "But I've been monitoring her social media." Serena pulled out her phone, pulling up Chloe Davenport's public Instagram. The most recent story, posted an hour ago, showed Chloe in a plush bathrobe, sipping mimosa in what was clearly a private jet terminal. The caption read, "Whisked away by my king for a romantic weekend, but rushing back Saturday for the biggest night of my life. Hashtag high society. Hashtag crescent moon. Ball. Hashtag coming out party." "He's bringing her," Beatrice whispered, the realization dawning on her. "He told you he was skipping it so you'd go alone and quietly represent the family, while he sneaks back into the city to make his grand public debut with the Mistress. He's planning to blindside you, to humiliate you in front of the entire city." "Exactly," Serena said, taking a sip of her martini. "He thinks I'm going to wear my usual beige Carolina Herrera, smile politely, and be entirely overshadowed when he walks down the grand staircase with his shiny new toy wearing my grandmother's diamonds. He wants the press to run the narrative. The dull, old money wife replaced by the vibrant, youthful muse." "He's severely underestimated you," Beatrice noted, her smile turning wicked. "He's forgotten who I am," Serena corrected. "I made Richard socially acceptable. Before me, he was a loud-mouthed coder who wore hoodies to Michelin-starred restaurants. I taught him which fork to use. I introduced him to the board members who funded his second round. He thinks his money buys him immunity from the rules of my world." "So, what is the play?" Serena opened her Hermes Birkin and pulled out a sleek, black notebook. "First, the finances. I spent the morning with Arthur Pendleton." Arthur was Serena's family wealth manager, a man who possessed a pathological hatred for new money frivolity. Arthur and I have quietly begun untangling my family's foundational trusts from Richard's holding companies. The prenuptial agreement Richard insisted on when we married, because he thought he was the one taking the risk, has a rather draconian infidelity clause that I insisted upon, mostly as a joke at the time. He violated it the moment he signed the lease on that Soho loft. "You're freezing his assets?" Beatrice asked. "Worse. I'm calling in the loans," Serena said smoothly. "Sentinel Data's upcoming IPO is built on a massive bridge loan provided by the Hastings Family Trust. It's perfectly legal for us to demand immediate restructuring, given his sudden erratic financial behavior, like spending $8 million on a necklace from company accounts." Beatrice let out a low whistle. "You're going to bankrupt his IPO." "That's for Monday," Serena said, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, icy resolve. "Saturday is about the optics. If Chloe wants a coming-out party, I am going to give her a front-row seat to what real power looks like. But I need your help, B. I need the seating chart for the ball rearranged. I need the press corps tipped off to a special presentation, and I need to make a phone call to Paris." Beatrice picked up her phone. "Consider the ball yours to command. Who is in Paris?" "An old friend," Serena said. "Antoine Laurent." Beatrice dropped her phone. "Antoine?" "Serena. Antoine Laurent hasn't designed a custom gown in 5 years. He went into seclusion after the Paris incident." "Antoine owes me his life," Serena said softly, remembering the dark, messy scandal in Monaco a decade ago that she had quietly buried for the brilliant, volatile designer. "And I need armor. Not a dress, B. Armor." The next 4 days were a blur of absolute surgical precision. Serena moved through her life like a ghost, maintaining the facade of the ignorant, slightly depressed wife for the benefit of the penthouse staff, knowing Richard's loyalties were split among them. She received brief, detached texts from Richard in San Francisco, complaining about meetings. She replied with bland, supportive emojis, all while sitting in the luxurious, heavily guarded suite at the Carlisle Hotel, which she had secretly rented under Beatrice's name. On Thursday evening, Antoine Laurent arrived. He was a tempestuous, brilliant man, all nervous energy and chain-smoked Gauloise. When he walked into the suite, he took one look at Serena's pale, determined face, dropped his leather duffel bags and said, "Who are we destroying, ma chérie?" Serena explained everything. The mistress, the betrayal, the necklace. Antoine's eyes blazed with a manic, artistic fire. He gives the Hastings sapphire to a catalogue girl? A girl who sells detox tea on the internet? Antoine practically spat the words. It is an insult to aesthetics. It is an insult to God. We will not just dress you, Serena. We will forge you into a weapon. When you walk into that room, she will feel like a peasant who has accidentally wandered into a cathedral. For 48 hours, Antoine and his 2 lead seamstresses worked without sleeping. They didn't use the soft, forgiving pastels Serena usually favored. They used black, but not just black, a deep, abyssal, obsidian silk velvet that seemed to absorb the light around it. The fitting was a grueling process. The dress was an architectural marvel. It featured a plunging, structured neckline that defied gravity, sharp shoulders that commanded absolute authority, and a corseted bodice that cinched Serena's waist into a devastating hourglass. The skirt was a masterpiece of illusion, fitted over the hips, but exploding at the floor into a dramatic, sweeping train lined with crushed scarlet silk that flashed like fresh blood when she walked. "It needs danger," Antoine muttered around a pin in his mouth as he adjusted the hem. "You are too safe, Serena. The Hastings are too proper." He reached into his bag and pulled out a pair of vintage, opera-length leather gloves, so soft they felt like second skin. Then he produced the crowning glory. A choker. Not diamonds, but a thick, brutalist band of solid platinum adorned with hundreds of black diamonds designed to look almost like a regal collar of armor. "If she wears your grandmother's blue stones," Antoine whispered, fastening the heavy platinum around Serena's neck, "you will wear the dark. You will be the void that consumes her light." Serena looked at herself in the 3-way mirror. She didn't recognize the woman looking back. The softness was gone. Her cheekbones, contoured by an elite makeup artist flown in from London, looked sharp enough to cut glass. Her blonde hair, usually worn in soft waves, was slicked back into an aggressively sleek, perfect chignon, exposing the elegant, swan-like column of her neck and the brutalist choker. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. She looked like a billionaire in her own right, not an accessory to one. Meanwhile, across the city, the trap was being set. Beatrice had executed her orders flawlessly. The Crescent Moon Ball was to be held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Usually, Serena and Richard, as co-chairs, would arrive last, descending the grand staircase of the Great Hall to applause. Beatrice had bribed the event coordinators. She adjusted the manifest. On Saturday afternoon, Chloe Davenport was frantically posting to her millions of followers from a luxury hotel suite, getting ready for the biggest night. "Can't wait to show you the surprises my love got me," she trilled to the camera, careful not to show Richard's face in the background, though his distinctive watch was visible in one frame. Serena watched the story on her phone while Antoine made the final adjustments to her train. She felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. The anxiety that had plagued her for months, the constant feeling of not being enough, of losing her husband, vanished. She wasn't losing a husband, She was taking out the trash. At 7 p.m., Richard texted her. "Sorry, Serena. Meetings ran late. Won't make it back. Have a good time tonight. Represent us well." Serena typed back, "I will. I promise you, Richard, I will represent exactly who we are tonight." At 8:30 p.m., the Great Hall of the Met was a sea of tuxedos and haute couture. The elite of New York, politicians, old money scions, A-list celebrities, and Wall Street titans were mingling beneath the towering floral arrangements. The press pool was corralled near the grand staircase, snapping photos of arrivals. According to Beatrice's planted rumors, an anonymous European royal was expected to make an appearance, keeping the paparazzi in a state of high, frantic alert. At 8:45 p.m., a sleek, black Maybach pulled up to the red carpet outside the Met. Inside the car, Richard Sterling straightened his bow tie, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He turned to Chloe. She was wearing a violently bright, sequined gold dress that left nothing to the imagination. And resting heavily against her collarbones, sparkling with a deep, oceanic fire under the streetlights, was the tears of the ocean. "You ready to show this city who the future belongs to?" Richard asked, kissing her neck. Chloe practically vibrated with excitement. "Are you sure she's not here yet?" "Your wife?" "Serena is punctual to a fault. She arrived an hour ago, slipped in through the side door to check on the catering. She hates the red carpet," Richard scoffed. "She'll be hiding at our table in the back. By the time we hit the top of the stairs, all eyes will be on you, baby. And when the press sees that necklace, the message will be clear. The old guard is out." Richard stepped out of the car, the flashbulbs immediately erupting into a blinding strobe light. He turned and offered his hand to Chloe, pulling her out into the crisp New York air. The press roared. "Richard! Richard over here! Who is your date? Richard!" They ascended the exterior steps and entered the Met. They walked through the antechamber and finally stood at the top of the grand, sweeping staircase that led down into the Great Hall. Below them, 1,000 of the most powerful people in the world milled about. "Look at them," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with greed. "They're all looking at us." Indeed, heads were turning. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. Beatrice Kensington, standing near the bottom of the stairs, saw them. She caught the eye of the orchestra conductor and gave a subtle, sharp nod. The soft, classical background music abruptly cut off. The silence that followed was heavy and expectant. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping forward to the very edge of the landing, ready to descend and present his mistress to the world. He waited for the gasp of admiration, the murmurs of his audacity. But the crowd wasn't looking at him. Their eyes were fixed on a point directly across the hall, at the top of the opposite staircase, which was usually reserved for museum benefactors. The heavy mahogany double doors swung open. And there stood Serena Sterling. The silence in the Great Hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the oxygen from the lungs of every billionaire, senator, and socialite present. At the top of the east staircase, Richard Sterling and Chloe Davenport stood frozen. The blinding strobe of the paparazzi's flashbulbs, which had been frantic just seconds before, abruptly stopped. The photographers physically turned their lenses away from the tech mogul and his shimmering, gold-clad mistress. They pivoted, as if magnetized, toward the west staircase. There, framed by the towering marble archway, stood Serena Sterling. She did not look like a discarded wife. She looked like an executioner. The obsidian silk velvet of Antoine Laurent's masterpiece devoured the ambient light, making her appear as a sharp, dark silhouette against the gilded backdrop of the museum. The brutalist platinum choker at her throat gleamed with a cold, unforgiving edge. She was terrifyingly beautiful. "Who is that?" Chloe whispered, her heavily glossed lips parting in confusion. She tugged at Richard's tuxedo sleeve. "Richard, who is everyone looking at?" Richard couldn't speak. The color drained from his face, leaving his artificially tanned skin a sickly, ashen grey. His jaw slackened. The woman standing across the cavernous room was a stranger. Where was the passive, accommodating woman who wore beige and agreed with everything he said? "That," Richard choked out, his voice barely audible over the sudden, rising murmur of 1,000 whispers, "is my wife." Chloe's smug, triumphant posture shattered. Her hand instinctively flew up to touch the tears of the ocean, resting heavily on her chest. Suddenly, the $8 million necklace felt less like a crown and more like a heavy, damning collar. Serena began her descent. She moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. With every step, the crushed scarlet silk lining of her train flashed, a stark, violent contrast against the dark marble stairs. The crowd physically parted for her as she reached the floor. It was the parting of the Red Sea, executed by the elite of Manhattan. No one dared to step on her train. No one dared to even breathe too loudly as she swept past them. Beatrice Kensington, standing near the center floral arrangement, raised her champagne flute in a silent, imperious salute. Serena did not immediately approach her husband. Instead, she walked directly to the center of the room, greeting the mayor of New York and the chairman of the museum board with a warm, flawless smile. She kissed cheeks, murmured pleasantries, and accepted compliments on the gala's stunning decor. She was completely, devastatingly in her element. Richard, humiliated by being ignored, practically dragged Chloe down the remaining stairs. He was a man used to dictating reality, and his reality was currently unraveling. He marched across the floor, intending to grab Serena by the arm and drag her out of the room to demand an explanation. "Serena!" Richard barked as he approached her circle. His voice was too loud, too aggressive for the refined acoustics of the Met. Several old-money matriarchs visibly winced. Serena turned slowly. She looked at Richard, and then, for the first time, she allowed her gaze to slide over to Chloe. She didn't glare. She didn't look angry. Instead, her eyes swept over the 24-year-old's cheap, spray-tanned skin, the overly tight gold sequins, and finally, the breathtaking blue sapphires of the Hastings family heirloom. Serena's expression was one of mild, aristocratic pity. "Richard," Serena said, her voice a cool, carrying bell. "You told me you were in San Francisco saving the global tech infrastructure. And yet, here you are. Did the regulatory snags resolve themselves, or did you simply get lost on your way to the airport?" A few people in the immediate vicinity stifled uncomfortable laughs. "Cut the act," Richard hissed, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "What are you wearing? What is this spectacle?" "This is my family's charity gala," Serena replied evenly, not stepping back an inch. "I'm hosting it. You, on the other hand, seem to have brought a stray." Chloe's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Excuse me? I am his—" "Do not speak to me," Serena interrupted. She didn't raise her voice, but the absolute, chilling authority in her tone slammed Chloe's mouth shut. Serena's eyes locked onto the younger woman's. "You are wearing my grandmother's collar. Enjoy it for the evening. It is the last expensive thing you will ever touch." Before Richard could formulate a response, the elegant chime of the dinner bell echoed through the hall. "If you'll excuse me," Serena said, turning her back on them with devastating finality. "I have a dinner to host. I believe Beatrice has shown you to your seats." The dining room, set within the Temple of Dendur, was a breathtaking display of wealth and philanthropy. Hundreds of tables adorned with white orchids and crystal candelabras filled the space. Richard, furious and vibrating with adrenaline, took Chloe's hand and strode toward the front of the room, expecting to find his name card at the head table alongside the governor, the mayor, and Serena. They walked past table 1, past table 5, past table 15. "Richard, where are we sitting?" Chloe whined, her high heels catching on the carpet. The stares of the surrounding guests were beginning to burn her skin. She was an influencer. She lived for attention. But this attention was cold, mocking, and entirely hostile. Richard flagged down a tuxedoed event coordinator. "Where is the Sterling placement?" he demanded. The coordinator looked at his clipboard, struggling to hide a smirk. "Ah, Mr. Sterling, you are at table 84. 84, Richard roared. Table 84 was located in the absolute darkest, most remote corner of the room, wedged tightly between the swinging doors of the catering kitchen and the hallway leading to the restrooms. It was a table usually reserved for junior publicists and last-minute, low-tier sponsors. He looked toward the head table. Serena was seated between the governor of New York and the CEO of the city's largest investment bank. She looked like a queen holding court. "I'm not sitting by the bathrooms," Chloe hissed, stomping her foot. "Sit down and shut up," Richard snapped, his temper finally fracturing. He practically shoved her into a chair at table 84 before turning on his heel. He was going to end this. Now. He stormed across the room, ignoring the shocked whispers of the elite as he approached the head table. "Serena," he commanded, leaning over the table, his hands flat on the white linen. "Outside, right now. We are going to talk about this childish behavior, and then you are going to fix my seating arrangement before I pull every dime of my funding from this museum." Serena took a delicate sip of her sparkling water. She patted her lips with a napkin and looked at the CEO of the investment bank to her left. "Jonathan, would you excuse us for a moment? My husband seems to be experiencing a stress-induced episode." She stood up, the black velvet pooling around her feet, and walked calmly toward a secluded alcove near the ancient Egyptian temple walls. Richard followed her like an angry bull. "You think this is funny?" He spat the moment they were out of earshot. "You think embarrassing me in front of the board is going to win me back? You're making a fool of yourself. That girl out there? She makes me feel alive. You're just old money and dead weight. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking the penthouse, and I'm locking you out of the accounts." Serena leaned against the cool stone of the temple, unbothered. "You can't lock me out of the accounts, Richard. Watch me. Sentinel data goes public on Monday. I'll be worth $12 billion. I will bury you in legal fees." Serena smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. "Richard, have you checked your phone in the last hour?" Richard frowned, his hand instinctively going to his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone. The screen was lit up with 47 missed calls, all from David, his chief financial officer. "What did you do?" he whispered, his bravado faltering. "I spent the week with Arthur Pendleton," Serena said softly. "We audited everything, including the $300 million bridge loan the Hastings Family Trust provided to Sentinel Data to float your operations until the IPO." Richard's blood ran cold. According to the covenants of that loan, as well as the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, which you so arrogantly signed, erratic financial behavior allows the trust to call the loan in early. Spending $8 million on my grandmother's necklace using corporate funds. Very erratic. "You can't do that," Richard breathed, panic finally setting in. "If you pull that loan, the SEC will halt the IPO. The company will bleed out. It's illegal." "It's entirely legal. The paperwork was filed at 4:55 p.m. on Friday," Serena said, her voice as smooth as glass. "Your CFO is likely calling to tell you that the underwriters have pulled out. Sentinel data isn't going public on Monday, Richard. It's going into receivership." "You're destroying your own money," he yelled, losing all control. "I am excising a tumor," Serena corrected him coldly. "I made you. I gave you the capital, the connections, and the social standing to build your little empire. And the moment you thought you were bigger than me, you used my family's legacy to adorn a catalogue model." Just then, Beatrice Kensington's voice echoed over the microphone at the front of the room. The dinner chatter died down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice purred into the mic, her eyes locked dead onto table 84. "Before we begin the auction, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a very special piece of history in the room tonight. Many of you old friends of the Hastings family might recognize the stunning blue sapphire collar being worn tonight by Mr. Sterling's guest." Every head in the room snapped toward the dark corner by the kitchen doors. A spotlight operator, entirely bribed by Beatrice, swung a blinding white beam directly onto Chloe Davenport. Chloe squeaked, throwing a hand up to shield her eyes, the diamonds around her neck catching the light and practically screaming their provenance to the room. "Yes," Beatrice continued, feigning awe. "That is the Tears of the Ocean, a Hastings family heirloom, sold during the recession of '92, and now, it seems, brought back into the fold to be worn by a woman who clearly appreciates shiny things." The collective gasp from the room was deafening. The old money crowd was merciless. Affairs were common enough, but flaunting a stolen family heirloom on a mistress at the family's own charity gala. It was a social crime of the highest order. It was unforgivable. Disgust rippled through the room. Murmurs of tasteless, disgusting, and vulgar echoed off the stone walls. Richard stood frozen in the alcove, watching his reputation, his company, and his entire social standing evaporate in the span of 3 minutes. Serena stepped away from the stone wall. She adjusted her vintage leather gloves. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Richard," she said, her voice a soft, fatal whisper. "And when you go home to that leased loft in Soho tonight, tell Chloe she can keep the necklace. Consider it a severance package." The spotlight on table 84 felt less like an illumination and more like a physical weight. Under the glaring, inescapable beam of white light, Chloe Davenport shrank. The smug, curated confidence that had fueled her rise as a digital influencer evaporated in a matter of seconds. In the sterilized, filtered world of Instagram, she controlled the narrative. Here, in the ancient, echoing chamber of the Temple of Denda, surrounded by the absolute apex of global wealth, she was nothing more than a trespasser caught with stolen goods. The whispers of the elite were not loud, but they were razor sharp. "Did Beatrice say, 'the tears of the ocean'?" murmured Sylvia Carmichael, a septuagenarian heiress whose family owned half of the Upper East Side. She raised her opera glasses, peering through the harsh light at the terrified girl in gold sequins. Good heavens! I remember when Serena's grandmother wore that to the Reagan inauguration, to drape it over a concubine at the family's own gala. The audacity is almost pathologically stupid. "He's finished," replied Jonathan, the investment bank CEO who had been sitting next to Serena. He didn't even bother to lower his voice. He pulled out his phone under the table, tapping out a rapid message to his head of equities. "Dump all private shares of Sentinel data on secondary markets immediately. Sterling is dead in the water." At table 84, Chloe was hyperventilating. The heavy platinum and sapphire collar, which had felt like the ultimate symbol of her victory just an hour ago, now felt like a burning ring of fire against her collarbones. She clawed at the clasp at the back of her neck, her manicured acrylic nails scrabbling uselessly against the intricate, vintage locking mechanism. "Take it off me," she sobbed, looking frantically at Richard, who had just returned from his disastrous confrontation with Serena. "Richard, they're all staring. Make them stop! Take this stupid thing off!" Richard didn't even look at her. His eyes were wide, glassy, and fixed on his vibrating smartphone. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of catastrophic notifications. It wasn't just his CFO, David, calling anymore. It was his lead underwriter at Goldman Sachs. It was his general counsel. It was the frantic, automated alerts from his private banking app, indicating that his primary lines of credit had been frozen pending a comprehensive audit of foundational collateral. Serena had not just pulled a thread, she had detonated the entire foundation of his empire. "We have to leave," Richard said, his voice a hollow, raspy wheeze. The artificially tanned, aggressively confident tech mogul had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His posture collapsed. "Get up, Chloe, we're leaving." "I'm not walking back through that room," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking in a highly unaristocratic wail. "The photographers are waiting out front. They heard Beatrice. They're going to tear me apart." "I don't care," Richard snarled, grabbing her upper arm with a bruising grip and hauling her to her feet. "My company is burning to the ground. Get up!" As they stumbled away from the table, desperate to find a service exit through the catering kitchens, the spotlight unceremoniously clicked off. The classical orchestra, on Beatrice's cue, seamlessly resumed a light, upbeat Mozart concerto, washing away the tension in the room as if the unpleasantness had simply been swept under an expensive Persian rug. Back at the head table, Serena Sterling remained the picture of absolute, terrifying serenity. She calmly finished her endive salad. Beatrice slid into the empty seat next to her, a predatory, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Well, I believe that went exactly according to design. I just got a text from the coat check. They practically ran out the service door by the loading docks. Chloe lost a heel." Serena didn't smile. The coldness in her eyes remained absolute. "It's only the beginning, Bea. A public humiliation is just theatre. True power is what happens on Monday morning." Beatrice shivered slightly, entirely thrilled. "You're taking the company." "I am taking back what is mine," Serena corrected, dabbing her mouth with her linen napkin. Sentinel Data's core intellectual property was developed using Hastings infrastructure servers. The bridge loan covenant explicitly states that in the event of a catastrophic default or executive malfeasance, the intellectual property reverts to the principal lender, which is me. "And the executive malfeasance?" Beatrice asked. "Just the affair?" "No," Serena said softly, turning her gaze toward the podium where the charity auction was about to begin. "Arthur Pendleton found something much more interesting when he dug into the purchase of my grandmother's necklace. Richard didn't just buy it. He embezzled the $8 million from Sentinel Data's R&D fund, masking it as a vendor payout to a shell company in the Cayman Islands to hide the purchase from both me and his board of directors. He committed federal wire fraud." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her diamond-clad throat. "Serena, that's prison. That's not just bankruptcy. The SEC, the FBI. The dossier was messengered to the Southern District of New York an hour before the gala began," Serena said, standing up. The obsidian velvet of her Antoine Laurent gown cascaded perfectly into place. "Excuse me, Bea. I believe it is time for me to give the opening remarks for the auction." Serena glided toward the stage. The entire great hall fell utterly silent before she even reached the microphone. The respect in the room was palpable, thick, and heavy. She was no longer Richard Sterling's quiet wife. She was Serena Hastings, the apex predator of Manhattan's elite, and she had just publicly executed a billionaire without spilling a single drop of blood on her couture. She stood at the podium, the brutalist platinum choker gleaming at her neck. She looked out over the sea of powerful faces, making eye contact with the men and women who controlled global markets. "Good evening, honored guests." Serena's voice rang out, clear, melodic, and devastatingly calm. "My family established the Crescent Moon Trust 60 years ago with a singular vision: to support the integrity, the art, and the foundational truth of this great city. Tonight, we celebrate transparency. We celebrate the removal of masks and the stripping away of false narratives." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. Everyone knew exactly what she was talking about. "In the spirit of that transparency and the cleansing power of truth," Serena continued, "the Hastings Family Trust is proud to announce an unexpected, incredibly lucrative restructuring of our tech portfolios, allowing us to double our philanthropic commitments for the next decade. Thank you all for your unwavering support. Let the bidding begin." The applause was thunderous. It was a standing ovation, not just for the charity, but for the sheer, unadulterated masterclass in warfare they had just witnessed. Serena stepped down from the stage, her scarlet train flashing like a warning to anyone who would ever dare cross her again. The fallout was biblical. By 9 a.m. on Monday, the financial news networks were locked in a state of absolute hysteria. The chyron at the bottom of the screen on CNBC flashed in urgent, screaming red. "Sentinel data. IPO cancelled. CEO Richard Sterling investigated for embezzlement. Hastings Trust seizes assets. Inside the sprawling, glass-walled offices of Sentinel Data in Hudson Yards, chaos reigned. Security guards, newly contracted by Arthur Pendleton on behalf of the Hastings Trust, stood at the elevators. When Richard Sterling stepped out of his private car, looking haggard, wearing the same crumpled suit from the Gala, his keycard flashed red. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," the lead security officer said, crossing his arms, blocking the glass turnstiles. "We have strict orders from the new interim board. You are not permitted in the building. A box of your personal effects will be mailed to your legal counsel." "I own this company," Richard screamed, spit flying from his lips, banging his fists against the reinforced glass. "I am the founder. You can't lock me out." "Actually, Richard, I can." Richard spun around. Serena was standing in the immaculate white marble lobby. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, dove-grey Tom Ford power suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense bun. Flanking her were Arthur Pendleton and two men in dark suits who carried the unmistakable, rigid posture of federal agents. "Serena, please," Richard begged, the anger instantly draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic, desperate whimper. He took a step toward her, but the federal agents stepped forward, their hands resting subtly near their waistbands. "Serena, you have to stop this. They're talking about wire fraud. They're talking about freezing my personal accounts. I have nothing. You've taken everything." "I merely balanced the ledger, Richard," Serena said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She looked at him not with anger, but with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "You took $8 million of investor money to buy my grandmother's legacy for a child. You forged invoices. You lied to the SEC. I didn't destroy you. You built your own guillotine. I just pulled the lever." One of the federal agents stepped past Serena, holding up a badge. "Richard Sterling, I'm Special Agent Vance with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of corporate funds and wire fraud. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." As the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around Richard's wrists, his eyes darted wildly. "The necklace! Serena, tell them. The necklace is collateral. It's worth 8 million. We can sell it. We can restitute the funds. Tell them." Serena tilted her head, a slow, dark smile spreading across her face. It was the first time she had genuinely smiled in months. "Oh, Richard, you really are a fool, aren't you?" Across town, in the Diamond District, Chloe Davenport was having a very different kind of breakdown. She had fled the Soho loft at dawn, packing 3 massive Louis Vuitton trunks with every designer bag, shoe, and watch Richard had ever bought her. The news had broken. She knew Richard was penniless and headed for prison. She was a survivor, and she knew when to cut her losses. But her ultimate prize, her golden parachute, was tucked safely in her velvet-lined purse. The tears of the ocean. She walked into the highly secure, bulletproof glass-lined office of Lev Abramov, one of the city's most discreet and wealthy estate jewelers. "I need to liquidate this," Chloe said, her voice shaking behind her oversized Celine sunglasses. She placed the heavy platinum and sapphire collar on the black velvet mat on Lev's desk. "It's a Hastings family heirloom. I know its provenance. It sold for 8 million. I'll take 5 million right now, wired to a Cayman account." Lev Abramov, a man who had been dealing in rare stones for 50 years, pulled down his jeweler's loupe. He didn't even need to pick it up. He stared at it for exactly 4 seconds. Then he let out a harsh, gravelly laugh. 5 million? Lev chuckled, pushing the necklace back toward her with the tip of his pen, as if it were contaminated. "Miss, whoever told you this is the Hastings heirloom lied to you, or they are incredibly stupid." Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about? I saw the Sotheby's receipt. It's real." "The receipt might be real, but these stones are not," Lev said bluntly. "These are laboratory-grown sapphires. Good quality, yes, but synthetic. The diamonds are moissanite. The setting is standard palladium, not platinum. This is a very good, very expensive replica. A prop. It was likely custom-made by a theatrical jeweler in London, worth perhaps $10,000 for the craftsmanship." "No," Chloe whispered, stepping back, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, that's impossible. Richard bought it. He bought it for me." "Your Richard bought a fake," Lev said, turning his attention back to his paperwork, entirely dismissing her. "And if he paid 8 million for it, he is an idiot. Have a good day, miss." Chloe stumbled out of the jewelry shop and onto the crowded, chaotic streets of Midtown Manhattan. The weight of her reality crashed down upon her. She had traded her youth, her public reputation, and her dignity for a man who was now in federal custody, and for a necklace that was completely worthless. She was a punchline. She was the mistress who wore glass to the Met Gala. Back in the sleek, silent penthouse overlooking Central Park, Serena Sterling poured herself a cup of black coffee from the silver carafe on the Marble Island. The same island where she had found the iPad just 1 week ago. She walked into a private dressing room, a vault of mahogany and reinforced steel. She bypassed the rows of designer shoes and the racks of haute couture, walking directly to the biometric safe built into the back wall. She pressed her thumb to the scanner. With a heavy pneumatic hiss, the steel door swung open. Resting inside, on a stand of pure white silk, was the real tears of the ocean. The true, unadulterated blue sapphires caught the ambient light, sparkling with a depth and a fire that no laboratory could ever replicate. Serena had tracked it down 2 years ago, quietly purchasing it through a proxy from a private collector in Geneva, using her own trust funds. She had known Richard would never buy it for her. His promises were as empty as his character. When Richard had secretly attempted to buy it last month through a shady, secondary broker to impress Chloe, he had unknowingly walked into a trap. The broker had sold him a flawless replica, a replica Serena had commissioned specifically for that purpose. Richard had embezzled $8 million to buy a piece of glass, funneling the rest of the stolen cash into his offshore accounts, sealing his own federal indictment. Serena reached out and lightly traced the cold, magnificent stones of her grandmother's legacy. She had not just survived the storm, she had become the architect of it. The tech world would bow to her now. The social elite feared her, and her family's legacy was safely locked away where it belonged, entirely untouchable. She closed the safe, the heavy steel locking with a satisfying, final click, and walked out to begin her day, ready to rule her empire alone. In the end, the spectacular downfall of Richard Sterling became a legendary cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of Wall Street and the gilded parlors of the Upper East Side. It proved that true power does not reside in loud proclamations, least luxury, or the desperate acquisition of youth. It resides in the quiet, absolute command of one's own worth. Serena Sterling did not merely exact revenge. She orchestrated a flawless reclamation of her dignity and her empire. She allowed her husband's arrogance to be his own executioner, outmaneuvering his deceit with a brilliant, calculating patience that left no room for mercy. The story of the billionaire's wife at the charity ball serves as a stark, unforgettable reminder. Betrayal may offer a temporary thrill, but hell hath no fury like a woman who controls the capital, knows the truth, and wears the real diamonds.